The only thing more annoying than a reaction video is a top 10 plugins you got to have to do this one thing type of video. And I told myself I wouldn't do it, and I'm not going to. But people have asked what I would suggest for tools you can get to help in audio post-production, besides just the basic ones that come with your DAW, whether it's Pro Tools or Logic or whatever. And the ones that I like to use, they're not specific to Pro Tools, so you could use these on pretty much any program you'd want. And it's not exhaustive, it's just a couple for each category of audio post-production. So I'm going to talk tools for dialogue editing, tools for sound effects editing and sound design, and then some tools for mixing. So if you're specialized in one of those areas, I'll put chapters in the video so you can skip ahead. These aren't tools you have to have, and every person is different. Every person should have their own unique tools, so I'm not telling you go out and spend your hard-earned money on these. I'm just telling you what I use because some people asked, so I figured I'd go over that. So let's start with dialogue editing. This does not include mixing. I'm talking a traditional workflow where first you dialogue edit, then you mix, not doing it all at once. So just dialogue editing, meaning taking the AAF or conform, the assembly with all the mics in it, and then producing an edited session that can then be mixed by a mixer, whether you're mixing or somebody else is mixing. So no mixing, no EQ, noise reduction, any of that stuff. And the first one is the most obvious, which is iZotope RX Advanced. I think I'm still on version 7, but they've got RX 9. Some of the updates have more meat on the bone than others, but the tools that I use in RX 9 Advanced more than others are the spectral editing, meaning going in, you can see here on the spectral display, the way I'll use iZotope more than anything else is to go in and highlight certain pieces of sound that I don't want and surgically remove them. So not blanket declicking or spectral repairing stuff. I literally go in and paint stuff out and repair it with either pieces of room tone from earlier that I've copied or using some of the other modules. But there's tons of modules to learn. Needless to say, for dialogue editing, RX Advanced is very useful. And I find it difficult to work without it. So next on the list for dialogue editing tools is Kraken. Kraken Dialogue Editor's Toolkit. And even though the website is very unassuming, it looks a little dated, this tool is amazing. And I'm glad they spent their money on making this tool and not the website, because for syncing up dailies or finding alts or just breezing through a dialogue edit and organizing all the material that you have to sync up and then look for especially alts and room tone and stuff like that, it's great. I got to try it out on one project, and it really changed the way I work. It's almost like having an assistant dialogue editor with you. So check it out. I believe there's a free demo. The guy, Mark, who made it is very responsive. He's on most of the forums and I think even some of the Facebook groups. So if you're serious about dialogue editing, check it out. The third tool that's really changed the way I work in dialogue editing is Auto Align Post. And this is Auto Align Post 2. So this syncs up and phase aligns different channels of recordings. So for a shot where the boom is a little too distant, but the lavs, maybe are a little bit noisy, and there's not an obvious choice of which channel's better, or you want to combine mics. I'll do that especially on wide shots where the tights sound great on the boom, but the wide shot, the boom is 10 feet away. This lines up the mics really quickly, and it's great. I think it is easy to overcut with this. Like, I know some mixers now require dialogue editors to cut both lav and boom for the whole scene. I think that's a total waste. Most of the time you can pick one mic and get away with it, but for those times where you have to use two, or there's people talking over each other on two lavs, this is great for fixing those phase errors that come up with just the different space and time in the recordings. Switching gears to sound effects and sound design, Krotos is a company that caught my eye, I think like 2 years ago, and they've got some really interesting tools for creating new sounds. But the one I've used the most is Weaponiser. It's a way to trigger weapon sounds. You can use it for other things like footsteps, but I've been using it for weapon sounds for layering and creating different flavors of a small set of samples. It's great for anything percussive that you need to trigger with, keyboard press, or creating unique one-shot sounds that can then be tweaked into an infinite variety of different sounds. And the layering is really good. The processing is really nice. You can use like compression and saturation on each channel. And it's really helped on some of the busier action shows that I've worked on where there's a lot of weapons. I could have presets and just fly them around to different scenes and trigger them by hand. So Weaponiser has definitely been useful. Soundly, I came from SoundMiner, and I've used Basshead and Audio Finder and probably a couple other sound library tools as far as like database managing and being able to search stuff and tweak sounds a little bit. I got Soundly just to try it out after using SoundMiner for several years, and I know a lot of big sound designers would just bow their head in shame at this, but the cleanliness of Soundly and the stability and some of the sounds in their cloud library are pretty useful. Like if I don't have what I need in my library, which I know my library really well, even though it's massive, sometimes I'll search their cloud library and there's sound like, oh, that's cool, that'll work. A lot of their stuff in their library is higher sample rate, so 96K. I think there's some 192. But it's just a clean, simple sound management interface. I do all my processing in Pro Tools besides a simple pitch shift or volume. So it really does what I need as far as organizing my sounds, getting them into Pro Tools. That's really all I'm using these for, because all the mangling and stuff that goes on, I like to do that in Pro Tools, synced up to pictures, so I don't need Radium or anything like that. So Soundly's great. It's great if you're a beginner. I'd say if you're a pro, most people prefer SoundMiner, but I really like it. It's just clean. It's very Apple-ish as far as how minimal it is, and I think it's a great buy. And the third tool that's been important for me over the past year with sound effects and sound design, it's not a plugin at all. It's actually this Zoom F6. Look at the size of this thing. It's super tiny. I got a big honking battery on there so I can power it for a couple days. And then, a good microphone like this MKH60. I've got stereo mic and a couple other mics that I'll use for different things, even contact mics. But just having the ability to take this, simply go out and record with metadata and time code if I want to run sync to this, it's been great. And if I ever wanted to get back into production sound, which I don't, it would be useful for that too, for like a budget or beginner interface. But it's cheap enough where if this gets destroyed in a car or burnt in a fire or something like that, it's $600. I can easily go get a replacement for that. Sound devices, I would be a little bit more concerned about that because they're expensive and the quality is really good. But the 32-bit float point recording on this means I don't have to worry so much about setting gain levels. And the dual DAC preamps on the Zoom F6 really help cover your butt for things like unexpected overs or dynamic range. When you're out recording sound effects, you don't know how loud things are going to be. A lot of the times you better get it on the first take, otherwise you won't get it at all. It doesn't have to be the Zoom F6, but just having some kind of portable audio recorder and a decent microphone to go out and record your own sounds, it's a big step up from just dragging things in from a library. Moving on to mixing tools. I gotta say, even with a bunch of newcomers to broadband noise reduction, there's iZotope, there's Buzzfree, there's a couple other ones that have come out with newer broadband noise reduction that's pretty good. Cedar still takes the cake. It is the most transparent noise reduction tool, and it's been around for so long. It's amazing to me that nobody's beat it yet as far as transparency. There's tools that can take out more noise, and there's tools that are cheaper by a lot. But just as far as flexibility and the pure sound quality, it is tough to beat Cedar. And just a little bit of Cedar is often all you need to get your dialogue tracks cleaned up enough to where it sounds like a movie. So if you've got the money for it and you know how to use it, it can be a good investment. You can make your money back. It is really expensive though. So if you're not mixing full time, it doesn't really make sense to get it. You stick with iZotope or whatever you can afford. But for me, if I can't use Cedar, I know that I'm not going to be able to take out as much noise without artifacts. Next on my list of important mixing tools is McDSP's SA2 dialogue processor. It was made on hardware conceived by Mike Minkler, who's a famous re-recording mixer. And it's a de-esser / multi-band compressor. This low band here is actually pretty low. I think when I checked it with Pink Noise, it was around like 1 or 2K. So although a lot of people use this as a de-esser, the way I use this SA2 dialog processor, it's almost like a mastering processor in my dialog chain, where it's after a compressor, it's after some de-essing's been done, and it just helps smooth out the upper mids and the high end enough to where the dialogue isn't grating on your ear. It sounds smooth, it's silky, still got high end, but just the sound quality this puts out with these bands, with not too much, but just a little bit, it really helps to smooth out dialogue, especially harsh dialogue. So I actually prefer this to Soothe, which a lot of people recommend. And then the third, but not last tool for mixing that I found just recently is made by Accentize. They've got some really interesting tools. They've got D-Room Pro, which helps remove room reflections and reverb. And I've used that on stuff that was shot on an echoey soundstage that was supposed to sound outside. Chameleon is a reverb matcher or reverb learning tool. So you could look at it kind of like iZotope's dialogue match function. But what's great about Chameleon is you can select some production sound and say, learn this reverb. And you can use that to match ADR or other takes that have less reverb. But you can also use it as an insert on things like Foley or sound effects as a way to match those sounds to the production sound. So I think that's great. Instead of trying to clean up the production sound and then add reverb back in, use what's there and just apply it to your other tracks. I've used it to match ADR recordings and those off dialogue lines that are too squeaky clean. Chameleon is great at matching reverb. It's an algorithmic reverb. It's not an impulse response. At least that's what I gathered from how it worked. And if you're trying to match Foley or ADR to a production recording, definitely check out the free demo. And then the final tool, which I think every mixer should have, really most sound editors should have it too, is my trusty RadioShack SPL Meter, which I got a long time ago. And these have become like more valuable than gold on eBay. But calibrating your room is the most important thing if you're mixing. You can't really mix on headphones. Making sure that your room is calibrated at the right level is the first step to a good mix. You also need to treat your room, which there's some tools for that. But just for ballparking your room, setting the levels, you got to have some kind of SPL meter that's at least calibrated enough to get you close. I hope this list has been helpful to you, maybe giving you some ideas for different tools you can look at, whether you're a dialogue editor, sound effects editor, or mixer. This video is not sponsored by any of these companies. None of them have reached out and said, make sure you bump our product or mention this or mention that. I am curious what you use, maybe some tools that I don't know about, because I'm always looking for ways to improve my workflow and improve the sound quality of my mixes and my sound design. So if you have a tool that you feel like isn't getting a lot of heat, go ahead and comment below. Let me know what it is, maybe even drop a link to it, and I'll check it out.